Hey, welcome to our podcast, Spill the Lesson, a show where we talk about relevant topics in our Punjabi community, catered to the current generation. I'm your host, Manvir Singh, joined by Arjun Singh. All right, so Sidhu Moosewala. Now, we all know about his career when it started in Brampton, and he became one of the biggest Punjabi rappers and singers. But let's go a little before that. Let's talk about his career before he came to Canada.
Absolutely. So yeah, I think as most of us know at this point, Sidhu Moosewala was born Shubdeep Singh Sidhu in Pind Musa, Zilla Mansa, or District Mansa, on June 11th, 1993. So fairly young guy. Mansa is a district that's in kind of the southernmost part of Malwa in Punjab, and came from, a very middle-class family, a landowning family, but by no means a family with, a lot of wealth. Mansa, in fact, is actually one of the poorer and less developed districts of Punjab. And Sidhu actually refers to this kind of directly in some of his songs. So, for example, one of his more famous songs, Tibbeyan Putt. Do you know what Tibbe are, by the way?
No idea.
So Tibbe refer to kind of actually undeveloped land or underdeveloped land that is not used for agriculture. So, Mansa in that southern area of Punjab, bordering Haryana and kind of getting closer to Rajasthan, that's where it's kind of the geography is, more arid and desert-like. And so Tibbe kind of refer to that area where it's like, a little bit more arid and sandy, and not all of it is under agricultural development. So all that is to kind of emphasize, this is, a guy with very humble beginnings. Humble Pind Musa has about 3,700 people, in a relatively underdeveloped part of Punjab as well. And so this is kind of, one of the reasons why his parents really wanted to get him educated and see, if he could make something of himself.
It's a very small pin that he comes from, and it's not a very developed pin from what you're saying, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, so other than that, from sixth grade, that's when he kind of got his interest in music. He listened to Tupac, and that's where a lot of the influence from him pursuing that rap or gangster rap style came from. To put into perspective of their situation and how average of a family they were, he was commuting to school on a bicycle. Now, I have a lot of family that's in Punjab, and everybody has a motorcycle nowadays. So for somebody commuting on a bicycle, that means, they come from a very, very average household. He was influenced by his parents to continue higher education, actually because a family member did go to graduate school. So through the guidance of his parents, he went to Guru Nanak Dev College, where he pursued a career in electrical engineering that he completed in 2016. And from there, he got an international student visa and came to Brampton, where he studied at Sheridan College. At that time, he still did have a huge passion for writing his songs, and he came up with the stage name Sidhu Moosewala. Around that time in 2016 when he came, he was ghostwriting a lot of songs. So one of the first songs that he came out with was License, where he wrote the lyrics for Ninja. And that was a song that really blew up, from where he started writing his own songs and decided to be a singer himself. And he came out with G-Wagon, which we all know about.
Yeah, so G-Wagon was sort of the first song where he was singing and came out with a music video. But I think, everyone can obviously remember his first major hit was really in 2017 with Sohai, with, Sonny Malton, Big Bird, and Brown Boys. And it pretty much all accelerated from there. The rest is kind of history in terms of his music career. But I think, there are some really important things to note with this. Unlike a lot of other, big Punjabi artists, all of these songs were pretty much released on sort of small independent labels, local labels. The only exception really being PBX1, which came out in 2018, which was with T-Series. But pretty much before that and after that, everything was independent and then eventually his own. In 2020, that's when he started Natyana Records. And most of his music released since then has been with that label. And this is quite unorthodox for a lot of these Punjabi artists who have made it to this level. And as you kind of mentioned, also doing so with mostly his own songwriting and his own lyrics. So he really kind of did it all on his own to the extent that one possibly could. Pretty much an independent success story.
Yeah, and going back to the release of Sohai, that was his second song. And me personally, I remember that was the first song I listened to from Sidhu Moosewala. So a lot of people I talk to that are fans of Sidhu Moosewala, I know there's one specific time that they remember, and that was where they were when they were introduced to Sidhu and who put them on to Sidhu Moosewala. So I was with a friend and they told me like, oh, you got to check out this rapper. He's from Canada. And I had no idea. I had no idea who Sidhu Moosewala was. And it was crazy because usually you hear a new song and you're like, oh, yeah, it's cool. But the second I heard Sohai, I was like, oh, man, this bangs. Like, Sohai put him on the map to the point where everybody knew who he was. And that's quite unorthodox. Usually, like you said, he didn't really have any collaborations. He didn't really have, people promoting him. And a lot of times you have, especially any singer in any industry, but usually Punjabi singers, the way it works is they come from usually a pretty well-off family that has financial backing where they can promote the career of whatever relation they have to that singer, whether it's their kid, their nephew, or whoever. Sidhu Moosewala came from a very average family. That's one of the things that I think is the craziest parts, where he didn't have any promotions from any big channels, any big labels. He came out with his music and people just accepted it, and he was such an icon for our culture. And I saw this clip where somebody said it very well, and they said, Sidhu Moosewala apne hik te jor te chalya. He put out his music and it just took off. He never went to, these big news channels or medias or other artists like, hey, promote my stuff. And a lot of times you see artists where they promote other people. None of that. He just took off, and he was basically a sensation from his first song. And for me personally, it was his second song, Sohai. So I think the amount that he achieved just by releasing that one song really put him on the map.
Yeah, as we were mentioning, it all kind of just accelerated from there. I mean, some of the, as we were kind of preparing for this, we were just kind of looking at some of the accolades that Sidhu got. And honestly, some of these I think we were maybe aware of in the abstract, but I didn't really know exactly what he had accomplished with some of these. I mean, these are you can find these easily on the internet, but, Tibbeyan Putt was, number 8 on the Apple Music charts in all of India. Right, which is just, a country of whatever, 1.3, 1.4, however many billion people it is now, or more than that even. He, Bambiha Bole with Amrit Maan,
that was a big
10 million
one,
views in 24 hours. It was, the top song in India, entered the top 50 in Canada and New Zealand in Apple Music, topped the UK Asian category charts, and it was on the top 5 of the global YouTube charts. I mean, these are just insane statistics. And then after that, Game with Shooter Kalon, it was the first song to hit the Canadian top 100 by Billboard. This is, like we said, this random kid from this average family in this small print in Punjab, just taking over, not even just the Punjabi music scene, the music scene globally.
Yeah, I think it's hard to wrap our minds around about how big and how influential Sidhu Moosewala was. He basically created a whole new segment in the Punjabi music industry, which was Punjabi rap.
I think so, especially with gangster rap, right? Like, I think obviously there have been Punjabi rappers, since before Sidhu Moosewala's time, but
yeah,
none who did it as convincingly, I think, and none in this specific style and genre. Like you said, due to the Tupac influence and et cetera, et cetera.
It's kind of crazy because the amount of collaborations that were coming and were developing. I mean, unfortunately, he did go at a very young age, but there was an album that he was working on with Burna Boy. And I know Burna Boy is one of the biggest artists in the UK right now. And there were so many other collaborations that he's working on. I mean, even Drake gave him a shout out for one of the biggest artists in the world to know who Sidhu Moosewala was, and to give him a shout out, and to play his song prior to releasing his own album. that's a huge accomplishment for any artist, not even US, but like a Punjabi artist. And I think the amount that he did for our culture, just in the point, putting Punjabis on the map, right? So many fans are not even Punjabi. You know, there are people that are of all ethnicities and of all cultures that are really, really big Sidhu Moosewala fans. And I don't see that type of energy reciprocated to a lot of artists that are in the Punjabi industry other than Sidhu.
And I think what's really special about him is, you know, not only how big he got, but how quickly he got there, as you mentioned. You know, I think there are, you know, obviously the first one that comes to mind maybe is Diljit, who is kind of on that same sort of level of stardom. And, you know, I think a lot of ways has slightly broader appeal in that he kind of, you know, there are a number of obviously Punjabi parents who were a little bit wary of some of Sidhu's songs and his messaging and his imagery and his videos and stuff. But, you know, in terms of just overall stardom in the Punjabi music industry, he comes to mind. But, you know, Diljit, as an example, not a knock to him, has kind of built it very steadily over the last 20 years, right? He, you know, has kind of been very strategic about his career, and, you know, has reached this level of stardom after a lot of prolonged hard work. And Sidhu's was overnight.
Was exponential,
you know, meteoric just rise. And with also a lot of hard work, but just that is something that I think we have never seen and may never see again, quite frankly.
Yeah, and coming with being such a star so quickly and pioneering his own music genre in the Punjabi industry, he was met with a lot of controversy.
Absolutely, you know.
Like going down in, you know, just a number of ways.
Absolutely. You know, I think obviously there's the controversy just around, you know, the fact that he had a lot of guns in his video and talked a lot about, you know, his shauq for hathiara and, you know, all these kinds of things. And, you know, this was perceived as promoting a kind of gun culture or gangster culture or what have you. And, you know, in a very similar way, I think, to his idol, right? Where, you know, Tupac and some of these rappers in the US were seen as kind of promoting gang violence and some of these, you know, questionable parts of street culture, so to speak. And there were a lot of also, I think, you know, funnily enough, what went along with that are just these kind of minor run-ins with the law that kind of, you know, revolved around some of this controversy. I remember there was the incident where there was a video of him shooting an AK-47 while he was in India, and then that was one charge that was made against him by the Punjab police, and then there was another one with his like car having like windows that were tinted too much. So all of this to say, like, it was kind of interesting because I feel like there was this controversy surrounding his songs and his music, but he never did anything that was, you know, showing that he was a violent person or was engaging in violence at some kind of, you know, systemic level. And so, you know, there were all these kind of minor little controversies that he would get wrapped up in by the Punjab police. You know, what the motivation behind that is, you know, we may not know, but to kind of try to use the law to paint him as some kind of a criminal, which, you know, there was very little evidence for in reality.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, like, we hear about Sidhu Moosewala, or maybe we hear his music and we think we have an image of who he was as an artist. But on the point that you said, all of these cases that were against him, I mean, something as light as window tinting. And there was one where he was shooting, I think it was an AK-47,
exactly, yeah.
And they made a huge deal about that. Yeah. And it separates, you have to remember, like, him on the back end as an individual versus him as an artist, there were two very different people. Even though he sang about this stuff, he had these morals of a very humble person that came from a collective family. That he did a lot for his band and for his family and for just Punjabis overall. And I guess you can see that from just putting his name and his stage name. Nobody knew where Musa was.
No, never heard of it otherwise. I mean, right?
Yeah, like you said, Mansa is a very, very poor average district, right? So for him to be putting that in his stage name, I know that I watched an interview and he said, you know, why did you put Sidhu Moosewala on your name? And he said, because everywhere I go, I carry my band on my back, and my band goes with me. And it's important to acknowledge that after all of this success, the biggest, I think one of the biggest, other than Diljit, like you said, artist out of Punjab, to go to Canada and become one of the biggest artists internationally, and at the end of the day come back, not to Delhi, not to Mumbai, not to Chandigarh, to come back to his pind, I think is one of the, I don't think we'll ever see it again, but one of the few things any artist or anybody that's even vaguely successful that comes from the pind will do.
No, I mean, it's completely rare, right? I mean, a lot of these big artists, some of whom have grown up abroad, but either went there abroad later in life, Manmohan Varis, Harbhajan Mann, even Diljit, right? These guys all live outside of Punjab most of the time. This is a completely rare thing for Sidhu Moosewala to do. And, that it kind of, is part of his story, right? I mean, he obviously got to a point where, as big of an artist as he became, he felt like he wanted to do more for his community and his municipality. And, politics kind of became, part of something he was interested in. So, and not just for himself, his mom ran for Sarpanch and actually won the position of Sarpanch of Musa Pind in December of 2018. And then, I think his journey really seems like it started with, when he released Punjab during kind of the Kisan Sangharsh. He and many of the other singers rather, were really on kind of the forefront of that morcha. And, he started to, I think, become a little bit more vocal about some of these issues. Then, of course, culminating and running in February of 2022 in the Punjab elections for the Congress Party. Unfortunately, he lost to Vijay Singla, who was the op candidate, who actually I did not know this, but Vijay Singla was removed from the position only 2 months later for corruption charges. So he actually had to step down in May of this year. I didn't even know that. So I don't even actually know who the representative of that area is right now in the Lok Sabha. But he obviously wanted to make a difference, in terms of, doing things for his community, doing things for his band beyond just music.
It's one of those things that kind of paints a picture of who he was as an individual. Like you said, he got a lot of criticism for the type of music he put out. And people are saying he's glorifying gun culture and he's glorifying violence. On that note, I think that him as an individual didn't believe that at all. He was just simply putting out music that the demographic wanted.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't think no one's perfect, and I don't think, any of us are under any kind of illusion that, he was this completely perfect dude who had absolutely no flaws. I mean, he, obviously there are aspects that you could, find controversy in his music, but I think the focus is lost, right? I mean, one, I agree with you. I don't think that's who he necessarily was. He's catering to a particular market. But also, I mean, nobody talks about the kind of versatility of his songs, right? I mean, he had, Dear Mama and Bapu and, 295 and even the love songs, right? Like All About You, right? I mean, these are the songs with Banduka and everything were only a fraction of like what he really put out there. It might have been his most famous contribution to the industry, but it's by no means all he wrote about.
Yeah, I think traditional media, and by traditional media I'm saying propaganda that's stirred up by the central government, they're trying to paint this picture of this person. He was involved in gang lifestyle, and he was mixed up in all sorts of things that kind of led to his death. And let's look at the narration of his death. I mean, he was killed very brutally. He was basically gunned down, execution style, by three. I think was it 2 or 3 cars that followed him?
It was about either 2 or 3 cars. I mean, it was an automatic weapon. They fired about 30 rounds, at him. It was like you said, it was brutal. And I think that's absolutely right. I think it's been kind of tragic to hear kind of the backlash since his death, right? I mean, you have just these very, obviously you had this thing come out that this guy Goldie Bra, or whoever the hell this guy is, some Canadian-based guy took credit for it.
Yeah.
That's now been questioned. Lawrence Bishnoi, again, whoever that is in this Bishnoi gang in India, who the guy's in jail, by the way, had some connections to this. It has absolutely been painted as kind of this petty gang war between, these people who don't like each other. And And, I think unfortunately we're never going to know exactly what happened. Was this just that, these couple of dudes who were pissed at each other and just decided to take it out in a very violent way? Or, were these guys just pawns for something much higher up and, somebody else really gave the order to do this? I don't know if we'll ever really know. I think it is suspicious given just kind of, the media opposition he's had since even before his death and even since then, right? That, kind of almost justifying his death in a way, like he got what he deserved based on the culture he was promoting. But I think there's been a lot of questions about whether that's actually the case.
Yeah, and to put into perspective of just like the pattern of events like this, Sidhu Moosewala was one of, I would say 90% of the youth in Punjab followed him. And there was another tragedy, which is Deep Sidhu, who passed away a few months ago. And it's just very, I don't want to use the word convenient, but it's very convenient the way that they both were wiped off and out of the equation. Deep Sidhu was such a huge role in the Kisan movement.
Absolutely.
And he was very well versed, and he was promoting a lot of youth to follow the knowledge of, okay, what's really going on and what is okay and what's not. And he got killed in a car accident. And now allegedly
a car
killed,
accident,
right? That's what I would say most people think that's what happened. He got killed in a car accident. Now there's suspicions about his death. There's so many things that don't add up about his death. Now with Sidhu Moosewala, let's look at some of the controversial things that he did talk about. He, first of all, came to stardom, had a huge following, one of the biggest artists out of Punjab, but he was also very vocal about the issues, and he was becoming increasingly vocal about the issues of Punjab. So let's look at, some of the lyrics that he talked about and some of the things like he was running for politics. And in the interviews, he was talking about, don't look at the political parties, look at what the individuals can do for Punjab. And the latest song, SYL.
Yeah, I think there was a whole pattern, right? I think this suspicion, I think it's important not to be a conspiracy theorist, but at the same time, right. I think, you got to call a spade, right? And I think there are plenty of questions that need to be answered and may never be answered, but I think need to be asked, if nothing else. 100%. Everything from, especially kind of, towards the end of his life, right? First it was, I think, Punjab with, that music video starts out with the speech from Bharpur Singh Balbir, in 1982, 1983, probably the like preeminent Khalistan speech, given at Darbar Sahib. And then kind of the days leading up to his death, on his stories on social media, like, videos of him in the car listening to these Kharku songs. He had that very famous interview just 2 days before his death, where he kind of tries to demystify this word Khalistan and what exactly it means. Yeah. And actually says in that very same interview, he doesn't shy away from the word Khalistan, but also says like, look, we have no problem living in India. Like, we're not trying to, create enmity with, our Muslim or Hindu brothers and sisters. Just basically give us equality is what he's saying. But he became more vocal about that. And then I think, like you said, really the icing on the cake just, I think, became SYL, right? I think it was already pretty much rumored before his death that a song like this was going to come out. And, we've seen the aftermath since, right? It's been banned in India. Even accounts, social media accounts discussing SYL or Sidhu Moosewala, like Ravi Singh Khalsa 8, have been banned in India. It's just ruthless. Yeah. And so, I think as a Qawm, we have kind of our antenna up a lot with these things, as it's important to not be a conspiracy theorist, but also when our youth who are becoming pro-Punjab and voicing their opinions about, what Punjab needs to do, then get killed almost immediately after, like Sidhu Moosewala, it raises our suspicions, and I think rightfully so.
Yeah, and it's, like I said earlier, it's very convenient that the way they went out. And on that interview that you were talking about, I remember watching it, and I had to sit up straight because I was like, wow, he's saying a lot of things that I know a lot of people in the central government or intelligence cells would feel very uncomfortable talking about. That interview, he talked about Khalistan and just mentioning Khalistan and mentioning what it meant in a way that was positive, shedding positive light and support for it was, wow, that was painting an image on his position on it. And also he mentioned, what is your position on guns? And he said some very, very interesting things. And he said, guns are dangerous in the hands of people that don't have gyan, right? In Sikhi, as Punjab being mostly founded by people that are of the Sikh faith, gyan, Shastra Gyan, which is what Sikhi teaches us, then you shouldn't be worried about picking up arms. So what was he preaching? He was basically preaching that, look, don't be afraid of picking up a gun, but you just have to know you have to use it for the right way. And that's one of the things that I was like, wow, just the central government's position on the threat that Sikhs face to India or how they perceive us, that's something that they do not take lightly.
I mean, he was very non-controversial about what he said. I mean, he literally said Khalistan is a place of the pure. I mean, that was it. He was not making some sort of manifesto on, this is going to be a Sikh theocracy and, that's what we're demanding. It wasn't anything like that. But just I think that word triggers so many people. You had all of these tweets from these Hindutva folks, this Khalistani got what he deserved, Khalistani sympathizer, this, that, and the other thing. All the same ridiculousness that we saw with Deep Sidhu and have seen, with anyone really who speaks up on Sikh or Punjab issues over the last 40 years. So, I think that's all part of this kind of same story. Even some of these small details surrounding his death, right? That, he usually takes an armored vehicle and didn't happen to take that one that day. And, these bizarre coincidences that lined up for, that day to end up the way it did. I think there's, whether it was gang violence, whether it was something much deeper, there was some kind of plan for this. The idea that this was some random gang outburst, I think, is easily refuted.
Yeah, and the interesting point on that, it was, when they say that this was just gang retaliation or it was just a rivalry, usually if it's something that is much more simpler, you go after somebody with a weapon that's easily attainable, right? A handgun or something along those lines. But the weapons that were used were military-style assault rifles. And there's a couple things I found interesting on this. One was one of the first things that happened when the police did come to the scene of the crime was they picked up all the cartridges off the ground. So there is no visuals that they have other than the rough footage of the locals that were living there of what weapons were really used, other than the size of the caliber that were in the brick walls, which are huge caliber weapons that were being used. So the locals are basically saying, like, this is the size of the cartridges that are being used, and they are very along the lines of military-style assault rifles.
And the grouping. I mean, that's the other thing they were saying is that, like, this has to have been done by some kind of, professional assassin or something of the like, because, like, how close together all the shots were was crazy. It wasn't just, a random spraying of bullets kind of a thing.
Yeah, this was somebody that was, or a group of individuals that were trained. They had excessive amount of training before they went on this mission to kill Sidhu, because an assault rifle is not something like a handgun where you just point and shoot. You have to hold it correctly. You have to address the recoil. You have to aim correctly.
And they're really hard to get in India. This is not the United States where you can go to a gun store and buy an AR-15, whenever you want. These are hard to get over there.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things is one of the first statements where the chief of police in Punjab, where a journalist asked about assault rifles. They said, there were a mention of assault rifles being used. I found his response very interesting, where his response to the journalist was, there were 3 different types of weapons being used. And that was basically his response to digress out of the topic of using assault rifles.
Interesting.
So they did not continue talking about, oh, these were the type of assault rifles you can use. Everybody knows they're assault rifles, but they don't want that to be one of the leads or one of the focuses. Now, it's common knowledge they were used, but why isn't it that it's investigated, or why isn't it that it's brought to the media's attention that these were basically not available to the general public?
Exactly. No, I think, there's just a myriad of questions that, I think hopefully more information will come out about. I mean, but, I think the powers that be will do whatever they can to keep this, under the rug as much as possible. I think, though, nonetheless, there have been some really positive developments. People do rally together in some of these times of adversity. And, we've seen kind of in the diaspora these really awesome movements, murals being painted in LA here, nearby in Artesia to where we are, and in Brampton, obviously, which is where he kind of got his music career started. And then in Punjab as well. I mean, the extent to which the government had any role in this, we'll find out. But, Bhagwant Mann, Chief Minister of Punjab, just last month on June 3rd, announced a cancer hospital and a sports stadium in Punjab are going to be named after Moosewala. A music academy is going to be created nearby his pind. And so, I think he's continuing to leave a legacy. And I don't think it's going to stop with some of these buildings being named after him or some of these songs that are being released posthumously. There's I think a lot of developments that are going to continue to come to the forefront over the next couple months.
Yeah, and it's very unfortunate that in this short span we've lost some of the most influential leaders to the Punjabi Sangat, especially our age demographic. These are people that we relate to, Sidhu Moosewala was so iconic. I mean, he's somebody that I personally looked at like one of the greatest artists ever. So it's very sad and it's very suspicious that especially after one of the greatest accomplishments, which was the Kisans getting those bills repealed and having these leaders bring so much attention to these issues, that shortly after that, within a year, both of them are suspiciously killed.
It's been a crazy time for our community, man, for the Qawm, for the Sangat. I mean, it's like, I know you and I talked about this is a big reason why we wanted to honestly start a podcast or something like this to talk about these issues is, between the Kisan Sangharsh and then Deep Sidhu's passing and now Moosewala's passing, it's been some of the just like craziest news around the Sikh Qawm, in terms of, major events happening in the last couple of years. Then there really has been, honestly, maybe since the 80s. It's feels like, at least in the diaspora, the community hasn't really been this united in a long time about, what its goals are and what it wants. And I think this is a really interesting time, and it's going to continue to be a really interesting time for Punjab and Punjabis, abroad. And I think, there's so many things that you and I both want to talk about, I think, as a result of this that kind of stem from both what Sidhu Moosewala stood for, what Deep Sidhu stood for, what the Kisan Sangharsh stood for, that we hope to get into, right? I mean, like you mentioned, SYL, the issues related to Punjab's water, some of the social movements, the environmental issues, the political movements that are happening there, and a lot of other issues that I think this has really opened our eyes to.
Yeah, going back to just us losing these voices, and this is one of the main reasons we started this podcast, to uncover the truth behind it. And I think it's really important for us to not let this just be a write-off of whatever the media says and says, it was killed in a car accident or he was killed gang violence. We need to uncover the truth, and we need to continue to honor their legacy. And, there was a lot of development and a lot of exposure to these issues that are coming, specifically with SYL and his latest songs, and going over all of the things that he talked about and digging deeper. And let's talk about the issues of Punjab and how this water crisis happened and what this means for the people that are living in Punjab, for agriculture, and just basically the state of Punjab itself, how it continues to be on this systematic decline. And those are all topics that we're going to get a lot more into and basically uncover the truth as the best we can, so everybody that's in the audience could come up with their own conclusions on what's happening and what are the facts and what is not being presented.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Arjun.